So today I finally get to give my thoughts and a full review of a device that I'm really glad that I eventually got to get my hands on and got to test out. Today we're talking about the Unihertz Titan Slim, and as someone who was a user of the BlackBerry Key series, this is the Key 1 in all black, which I still think is just a fantastic looking device. This thing was very interesting to me. This is a device that is not very expensive, right? We're talking about $329. We are running, Android on this device. And while it's not the most up-to-date version of Android, it's not something that's super old either. But let's be honest, the biggest thing here, the claim to fame for the Titan Slim is going to be that full QWERTY keyboard. Before we really jump into it deeply, though, I do want to just kind of get the specifications out of the way because that's something that I tend to forget to do. And yeah, it's important. So we are running a Helio P70 octa-core processor, which is not a particularly fast system on a chip, although it has performed admirably. You're not going to be doing any sort of gaming on this device simply because of the fact that you've got a keyboard. Now, maybe that's wrong because you could play some emulators on this and map some stuff to the keyboard, and that would actually be pretty cool. But in terms of playing like Android games where you're holding it, out like that, not really a gaming-centric device. But, for normal tasks, jumping from app to app, this thing is actually pretty okay. Android 11 is what we have on board here. I would love to see an Android 12 update, right? Like Android 11 is getting a little long in the tooth. Would like to see that update come along. 6 gigs of RAM, but 256 storage is more than you typically do get. So in terms of that stuff, not so bad. 4100 milliamp hour battery. We'll talk about that battery life a bit later, but it is a relatively large battery, but it does actually last a pretty good while, partially because of this Helio P70 processor working in tandem. It's kind of a more power-sipping processor, relatively large battery. Ends up being a pretty good combination. No micro SD is a little bit of a bummer, but you do have dual SIM. You actually have 2 separate SIM trays, which is a little bit interesting for the approach, but it does, I imagine, work rather well. 4.2-inch display at 768 by 1280. So the display is a little bit low resolution, maybe not the best looking display. We'll talk about that a bit later. The cameras are an 8 megapixel for the selfie and a 48 megapixel for the primary, and we will also look at some camera samples a bit later on. There is a fingerprint sensor that is right above the keyboard there. Programmable key, which is you can use it as like a shortcut key to open whatever you want. And you can kind of see the rest here. There is an infrared port, so there's an IR blaster, FM radio is there, but there is no 3.5 millimeter jack. So again, you can kind of see the rest of this here on this screen. And at this point, I think it would make sense to actually do a hardware tour of this device. So the first thing you're likely to notice about the Unihertz Titan Slim is that you may look at it and turn it this way and think, boy, that device does not seem slim at all. It actually seems quite wide, and it is, in fact, a very thick, girthy sort of a device. The Slim appears to come from this way, not this way. So that's where we have to keep in mind when we're talking about a Slim. Get a good look here at this keyboard, and we'll talk a bit more about it as we go further in depth. And I actually think that the keyboard, it's pretty decent, right? Like, it's a pretty solid little keyboard. The layout is probably the area where I have the most issues, and again, we'll dive into that a bit later. We're just going to do a quick hardware tour in this one. Fingerprint sensor up top, navigation keys there if you want to use them, but you don't have to. You can use the swipes if you want to do that. We have a speaker, USB-C, probably a microphone there. That is your little programmable key in addition to the 2 SIM trays that I mentioned earlier. We have an IR blaster up top as well as I'm thinking probably another microphone. On the other side, we have the power button and the volume rocker on the back of the device. It is sort of an odd looking finish. It kind of has like this like shimmery thing going on. There is a single camera, single LED flash on the front. You have, just unlocked it there. You have the speaker grill as well as your selfie camera there. So it's a fairly simple device in terms of the looks. I actually don't mind the way it looks. It does kind of have a plasticky feel to it, and you can probably see there that it's a bit of a fingerprint magnet. They do actually include this case, which I did not use primarily because the back of it has a texture to it that is just rather unappealing to me. It's a little too sharp, and it just does not feel good on my hands, so I did not use this case. But if you want to use it, that should, I believe, be included in the box. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper here in some of the other details. You might notice here that I'm actually running Niagara Launcher. I don't really care for their stock launcher. There really wasn't a whole lot going on there. It was really, really basic. really, really simple app that I just didn't really like. So I switched to Niagara Launcher, and I find that it does actually work very, very well. Let's talk about this 4.2-inch screen. It is not particularly high resolution, and when you are in applications, let me find something that's got a lot of contrast, maybe just a photo. Probably gonna be hard to see in this, but you'll just notice that there's just something off about, maybe it's the contrast, it's an LCD screen, there's just something slightly off about it. The areas that are dark almost look too dark, you just kind of lose detail, and there's just, I don't know, it just kind of looks like a lower end LCD panel to me, which fair enough, that's what it is. You know, if you keep that in mind though, it's going to be a serviceable screen to use. If we go in here and open up a YouTube video, you'll be able to maybe see a bit what I'm talking about here. I don't know. It just does. It's not a great looking screen, but again, you know, and by the way, off axis, it's really quite not good. If I get off axis here, you might be able to see there a lot of bad stuff starts to happen when you're off axis. So again, not a phenomenal screen, but you're probably not buying this thing with like multimedia consumption in mind. And if all you're using it for is getting some typing done, sending some emails and things like that, the screen is going to be totally sufficient. So I don't know what peak brightness actually is on this thing, but I think you can see here that it's not phenomenal. That is maxed all the way out. And in broad daylight, I'm having a hard time even focusing on it here. It's okay, but this thing is definitely not going to dominate on a bright sunny day outside. Sticking with sort of the media consumption aspect, if we turn up the volume here, let me let you hear what the speakers sound like. Let's move the mic nice and close and give you an audio sample here. I wanted to give you guys a quick update this morning on a news story that I reported on all the way back at the end of September. And this story was related to Microsoft. And of course, this is a single stereo speaker. They're not using any sort of amplified earpiece there. And the speaker, if I'm being honest, is just not very good at all. It's kind of tinny. It distorts at maximum volume, or really anywhere past like medium volume. So again, media consumption device. This is not shocking absolutely no one. A couple of small things to mention as we move on. This thing, because of the system on a chip, is not capable of 5G. This is a 4G only device. You can probably see that up there in the corner, that it is 4G only. It is also about 202 grams, which makes it a little bit on the heavy side. Not crazy heavy, but it is definitely a little on the chonky side. The haptics in this device, which is something you're going to experience at, you know, different times whenever you are swiping to go back or something like that. The haptics are honestly really bad. They might be more noticeable to your ear than they are to actually feel. Let me see if I can actually allow this to be heard by my microphone here. Let's get real nice and close. Let's see if you can hear this, because it's really loud. All right, so enough about all that stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the keyboard now, because that is honestly the showstopper for this thing. There are a few really good things about it, and there are a few things that I really don't like about it. So the first thing I notice I just really don't love is the actual keyboard feel itself. If I get off axis here, maybe you can see that they're slanted in such a way that they're almost pointy up top. Now, this is very different from how it was done here on the BlackBerry Key devices, where they're just sort of a bubble. They're more round and they are softer. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I don't love this. The primary being that you're supposed to be able to swipe on this to scroll. Well, maybe this is just because I have issues with like some sensory stuff, but swiping around on that, it feels absolutely horrible, and I had to not use that feature. It works, but it just feels terrible to be doing that. And just in general, I don't like how sharp and pointy it feels a lot of the time. The fingerprint scanner is up top. On the BlackBerry device, it's built into the space bar. Now, I know that BlackBerry has a lot of patents, and that keeps companies like Unihertz from being able to just, do what they were doing effectively. So they have to change some things. Some of these things are good, some of them are bad. I like the fact that they said, well, hey, we're gonna have our fingerprint scanner up top. Well, we're gonna put a back and a multitasking button up there as well, and you can actually tap on that to go home. It operates as a home button. But the problem is, when you're typing, you'll brush it accidentally and you'll go home. So I've had to actually change it to be a double click to go home. So make sure you change that setting, because I can't tell you how many times I was typing and I would accidentally just hit a Y plus the space bar, and I've gone home, and now I've got to go back into the app. So that was a little bit annoying as well. The Alt function symbol and a Shift keys all being up top is definitely something you're going to have to get used to. And then, of course, the space bar being buried between the B and the V are also things that you kind of just have to get used to. Now, the good news is, with muscle memory, the more you do this, the more you will just sort of get used to it. And I do like that they have a row up here with some of the simple things that you might be doing, like a period, exclamation point, things like that, just pop up there. And then the symbols key, if I hit that, something has gone horribly wrong. That was weird. I had to type something for that to pop up. So you get this key as well, which lets you get into some other things. So there's some nice options in terms of the software experience as well. What about the actual just key travel and the presses? I think that they feel pretty good. You can't have a ton of key travel in something that's this small, but they're nice and clicky. They feel good. They sound good. The typing experience is actually pretty decent once you get used to the changes that had to be made and once you change the setting regarding that fingerprint sensor. Now, another really cool thing that I love is keyboard shortcuts. Watch this. I'm going to press J, and that will open the text messaging app with my conversation with Jesse. And you can see that it's blank, and that's because I wasn't actually texting from this. I was using the web app of Google Messages, but you can see how that would work. What about YouTube? How about a long press on Y to open up YouTube? How about a long press on T to open up Twitter? All of that stuff is really, really good, and I love that it works on any launcher that you choose to use. Fantastic. A thing that I wish was better, and this is a place where, let's be honest, WebOS, Palm Pre was right, just type. What happens if you just start typing on your keyboard? Well, actually, on Niagara Launcher, apparently this does work, but on the stock launcher app, it does not work. So another good reason to use Niagara Launcher. Let's try this real quick. Let's see if I just start typing in YouTube. Okay, so something's gone horribly wrong the second time that I've tried it. We just have that popping up. Let's try it one more time. Yeah, okay, so just type does not work. I don't know what happened there for a moment. I think for some reason it actually like triggered a search or something that was functional for a brief moment, but it is no longer, oh, it's working again for some reason. Strangely inconsistent. Don't know what to make of that. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the fact that it would be really nice if you could just start typing on your home screen. It would start doing a universal search of some kind, searching your contacts, the web, so forth and so on. That would be very, very cool, but that is not a thing that just works out of the box in Android. So I kind of want to spend a little bit more time on the keyboard and talk about it more in like a philosophical sense, I guess, instead of just showing you the keyboard itself. I talked about this a bit in the unboxing video, but I'll kind of rehash it a little bit here as well. The difference to me between typing on glass versus typing on hardware, well, it's actually really, really simple. A lot of people get a keyboard like this, and they're typing, and they're really slow, and they're deliberate. And they're like, I really just prefer typing on my phone. And that's going to be true out of the gate. But what you have to do with something like this is you have to learn the layout. You basically have to relearn to type. A lot of us are swipe typing now. So we've learned to type on our phones in a radically different way than thumb typing like this. So some of us are just used to thumb typing from the BlackBerry days and the Palm days, and that's why this works for us. But for those of us that have never learned that, it is a very steep learning curve. But what winds up happening eventually, and it may take some time, once you learn this keyboard, you won't find yourself necessarily typing faster than you do on glass, but you will be typing more accurately. And at the end of the day, kind of like the tortoise and the hare, you wind up winning the race through accuracy, not through just overall speed of typing. The frequency with which you swipe out a word and it's wrong, and you have to delete the word, swipe it out again, it's wrong again, delete it again. I do this all the time when I swipe type. It happens to me constantly. Even when I'm thumb typing on glass, I have to delete the word and start over quite a bit. On this, that's not going to happen. So while you're typing slower, you're avoiding those instances, and at the end of the day, you have typed more accurately, and you've gotten to the end of what you're trying to say more quickly. Do I think the Titan Slim accomplishes that from its keyboard? Yes, I do. Once you learn this keyboard, once you get proficient with it, it is going to accomplish that task as well as most other keyboards on smartphones that you've probably used in the past. And the fact is, there really aren't that many options to choose from. So it's one of the best ones available almost by default. Believe it or not, I actually think that some of the software that they've added here is pretty solid as well. You're going to want to go into this intelligent assistant section because there's a lot of good stuff in here that you can go into. Not going to go into all of them, just the ones I'm using. Keyboard shortcuts. fantastic. Absolutely adore keyboard shortcuts. LED notifications. There is an LED light up here that will give you a light depending on what's going on. That is very, very cool. And you can adjust that there. This is where you can turn on scrolling with the keyboard down here, which again, I leave turned off just because it doesn't feel good to do. Strangely enough, my haptics were gone there for a while. They're back now. That was very odd. Shortcut settings. So you have your little shortcut key over there, and if you select PTT key, you can go in and set this to be whatever you want it to be. So on mine, one press goes into the camera, a long press opens YouTube Music, and a double press turns off or on the flashlight. You can also hold the touch button down here, the fingerprint scanner, to trigger Google Assistant. So all of these things are actually quite good. Spacebar key. How about double click it to take a photo in the camera app? That is very good. Call, hang up, incoming calls. That stuff might be pretty useful to you as well. Under more settings, there are at least a couple more things. This is where you can change the home function key, the fingerprint scanner, and make it to be double pressed to go to the launcher. Definitely do that. Swap the Alt and Shift key if that's more comfortable to you. So like I said, there's just a handful of really solid little software pieces in there to go in and customize things. Under display, you actually almost kind of get like a little bit of like theming going on, which is very, very cool. So accent color, you can change that around. You can change the icon shape. So like that's kind of a cool thing to be able to do as well. You can go into mirror vision up here and hit the little settings up here and change the picture mode from standard, user mode, vivid. You can actually adjust or tune the way that the screen looks, make that look a little bit better. But like I said, probably the most unfortunate thing is the fact that it is still running Android 11, which you can see there. Let's get 12 on this thing, guys. I mentioned battery life earlier. The fact it's a 4100 milliamp hour battery and it is a lower end processor means the battery life is actually very, very good. It's also a relatively small screen. This thing is going to last you all day just fine. Now keep in mind, there weren't really days as I was testing it where I was pushing 5, 6, 7 hours of screen on time. This is just not a device you're going to push that much screen on time because you're not going to be sitting there doom scrolling or watching TikTok and things like that on here, which you can do, but just in my experience, it wasn't something I was doing. In my use, I could probably get almost 2 days out of this thing. It was really lasting a long, long time. So I think battery life is going to be very, very solid for most people. Of course, that's not to say that a power user wouldn't be able to kill this thing in a day, but I would probably say average screen on time, 5, 6, 7 hours is absolutely something you should expect. And I think the last thing left to talk about here is probably going to be the camera. So let's start off with a couple of video samples and then we'll jump into some stills. Let's take a look here at video performance on the Unihertz Titan Slim. Settings are absolutely bone stock, exactly as they come. Pay attention to any sort of stabilization that is there. How are we handling the brightness and the shadows there kind of coming together, the detail, the colors, and the sound. There also is the ability to take a picture while you are filming. So let's test that out and I will show you that picture whenever we are done. And this is some selfie video on the Unihertz Titan Slim coming into some bright light here. What do you think? So this is the still taken from that video, and as you can see, it is pretty bad. But let's look at some other pictures because while the video is pretty awful, the camera itself with still photos is actually sometimes okay. So here's one taken outside at the same time. And I think you can see here that it's doing a decent job in terms of the details. Exposure is a little tough here because of the shadows and the brightness here, but I think it does okay. Here's one of the tree, and kind of similarly, you know, it's doing all right in these shadows down here below. You can see a little bird's nest in there from spring. Colors look okay. Here's one indoors with a little bit lower light. And again, you know, it's not great, but I think it does fairly serviceably. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. Another one indoors, a little bit darker, and, you know, you get some grain, some loss of detail in the darkness there that is definitely noticeable. And of course, the darker it gets, the more that tends to be true. No night mode or anything like that on here. So I think this is kind of what you should expect. Here's a shot actually, you know, at night. It's lit, but you can kind of still see what this thing's able to do in the dark. And it's really not going to do great in those darker settings. And the selfie camera is, I mean, it is what it is. It's not fantastic. Honestly, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised by the camera. I expected it to be like full blast potato mode, but it's actually not horrible. I mean, okay, it's pretty bad. But for what I was expecting, I think in some broad daylight, you can get some shots that you could post on Instagram and be okay with. You're not going to be a videographer with this thing, but I think that overall the camera kind of does okay. If you want something with a great camera, this is probably not the device you're looking at. Anyways, this is going to be sufficient. But guys, that kind of brings me to my conclusion here. For this device, we have to keep in mind and we have to consider who this device is for. It's for that BlackBerry crowd. And for $329, it's a device I think I could kind of recommend to people. It's not the best thing I've ever used, right? You saw some bugs while I was filming this. The camera's not great, but the battery life is solid. The keyboard, once you learn it, I think is going to be totally fine. I could feel myself getting more and more proficient over time. I wish the screen was a bit wider and a little bit better, a little bit higher resolution. But again, if that's, probably not going to be your primary concern if you're looking at this device, it's going to be good enough for that. And again, coming back to that $329 price tag, I think it's a pretty solid device. If I was gonna, I don't normally give like numbers, but this might kind of help you get an idea of like where I'm at. If we're scoring it out of 10, probably say like a 6.5, which would be somewhere between okay and good, right? This is not a great device. It's not an 8 or an amazing 9. Somewhere between that 6 and 7. It's right firmly in the okay range. But if you are someone that needs or really wants a hardware keyboard, that is going to elevate it higher and higher. So this is a very niche device for a very specific person. Hopefully this information will help kind of inform you in terms of if this is a purchase that you would like to make. I will have an affiliate link down below to Amazon as well as a direct link to their website. If you want to pick one up, you can use those links down below. Thanks to Unihertz for sending this thing out for me to review. As always, they are seeing this review at the exact same time as you are. I will see you on the next one, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.